There are exactly 3 seconds between the moment you realize your life is about to change and the moment you decide whether to let it happen. I know because I counted them. She was already walking away, hand on her car door, face turned toward the street, the conversation over. Safe, predictable, the way every neighbor interaction should end. Then she stopped, turned back, and in those 3 seconds before she spoke, I watched 15 years of carefully constructed safety recognize its own expiration date. I didn't expect you to be like everyone else, James. Her voice was calm, almost bored. But if you want to prove me wrong, you know where to find me. I froze, not from shock from recognition. She just said out loud what I'd been hiding from myself for years. That I was a man going through the motions. That everything I'd built, the marriage, career, the perfect suburban life was performance art I'd been staging so long I'd forgotten it wasn't real. The words hung between us in the summer air. I remember the street lamps reflecting off her car, the faint trail of her perfume, the dizzying sensation that whatever I thought my life was had just been revealed as something temporary, something I could lose if I had the courage to reach for what I actually wanted. I'm 42 years old enough to know that some moments can't be taken back, young enough to still be terrified by what that means. Irma had moved in 3 months ago, next door, blonde and elegant in a way that didn't demand attention, but somehow earned it anyway. Late 40s, recently widowed, I'd learn later. We'd done the neighbor dance, borrowed tools, discussed HOA politics, and maintained the careful distance that suburbia requires. Nothing dangerous, nothing real, until that evening at the Mitchell's barbecue, when Sarah left early with a headache and I stayed because leaving together felt like admitting something. When Irma said goodbye, and I followed her to her car without planning to. When we stood there longer than necessary, and I looked at her not accidentally, but deliberately long enough that the silence between us changed into something that demanded acknowledgement. She held my gaze, didn't smile, didn't soften it, just studied me like I was a structure she was evaluating for weaknesses. Then delivered her statement like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding. I mumbled something about being tired, needing to get back. She smiled, but not with kindness, with knowing. The look you give someone when they've just proven exactly what you suspected about them. When I turned toward home, I saw Sarah through her kitchen window, unloading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. The contrast was devastating, Irma's challenge vibrating in my chest, Sarah's silhouette representing everything I'd chosen and everything I'd given up to have it. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth. Irma hadn't propositioned me. She dared me to stop being a coward. And now I had 3 seconds to decide if I was brave enough to accept. I didn't realize this moment would become a pattern until I studied it. Most people think stories like this are about desire. They're not. They're about identity erosion, the quiet trade people make between being approved of and being alive. I've spent years breaking down why stable lives collapse without explosions, why nothing is wrong is often the most dangerous sentence in a marriage, and why recognition feels threatening before it feels honest. If this story unsettled you, it's because you recognize yourself. Subscribe. This channel isn't entertainment, it's a mirror. I'd built my life the way I've been taught to build buildings first, then structure, then the aesthetic details that make people forget they're looking at calculated engineering. The firm Jason and I started 15 years ago occupied the 6th floor of a converted textile mill downtown, all exposed brick and steel beams, the kind of space that photographs well for industry magazines. We'd landed the Morrison Hotel project last spring, 18 months of work that would cement our reputation or break us trying. Jason handled clients with the easy charm I'd never quite mastered. I made sure the buildings didn't fall down. It worked. He was a craftsman in Riverside Oaks, the neighborhood where everyone drives German sedans and pretends their marriages are as solid as their property values. Sarah and I had bought it 7 years ago, before the market went insane, painted it the approved shade of sage green, installed landscaping that required exactly 45 minutes of weekend maintenance. Inside, everything coordinated. The furniture matched the rugs, matched the window treatments, matched the life we'd agreed to perform. Sarah worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled twice a month, returned with stories about hotel restaurants and difficult doctors. We'd stopped asking detailed questions years ago. The answers never changed, and neither did we. The Mitchell gathering was typical required attendance disguised as community. Sarah had left early, migrating her diplomatic exit strategy. I'd stayed because Jason was there with Amanda, and leaving alone felt like advertising something. Irma stood near the dessert table, listening to Margaret Preston's monologue about Poole resurfacing with an expression of polite focus that somehow conveyed she was cataloging every weakness in the room. When her eyes found mine across the deck, I felt briefly transparent, not desired examined, like she'd already drafted the report on everything I'd carefully hidden behind professional success and coordinated throw pillows. When she'd walked toward her car, I'd followed. That was the first mistake, or maybe the first honest choice I'd made in years. The rendering refused to come together. I'd been staring at the Morrison lobby elevation for 20 minutes, watching the cursor blink on my screen like an accusation. I didn't expect you to be like everyone else, James. The words had taken up residence in my skull, playing on loop beneath every conversation, every email, every moment of silence. Jason appeared in my doorway with coffee, his usual Tuesday offering. "You good?" "Fine. Just tired." He studied me the way he'd been studying me since sophomore year of college, when we'd been assigned as roommates, and he'd somehow decided I was worth befriending. "You're somewhere else, man. The Morrison client presentation is Friday." "I know." I turned back to the screen, hoping he'd leave. He didn't. "Amanda asked if you and Sarah wanted to have dinner this weekend. I'll check with her." The door closed softly. Jason knew when to push and when to wait. I envied that certainty, the way he moved through his marriage like someone who'd never questioned whether he'd chosen correctly. Sarah and I had started like everyone else. Chemistry mistaken for compatibility, passion that felt like purpose. We'd met at a gallery opening, bonded over shared taste in mid-century furniture and disdain for people who said utilize instead of use. The wedding had been elegant, affordable, attended by people who approved. Somewhere around year 7, we'd stopped finishing each other's sentences and started finishing each other's wine. By year 10, we were experts at parallel living in the same house, separate orbits, occasional intersections that felt more like courtesy than connection. Thursday evening, I knocked on Irma's door with a serving dish, my excuse rehearsed and flimsy. She answered barefoot, unsurprised, and the conversation that followed stripped away every careful lie I'd been telling myself about what I wanted and why I'd really come. Cleo arrived on Saturday in a vintage Mercedes convertible that looked like it had opinions, her dark hair whipping in the wind as she pulled into Irma's driveway. Where Irma was composed and careful, Cleo's kinetic energy barely contained oversized sunglasses, red lipstick, and laughter that carried across property lines. I watched from my office window as the sisters embraced, Cleo spinning Irma in a circle like they were teenagers instead of women pushing 50. The Hendersons' barbecue that afternoon became unavoidable when Sarah accepted without consulting me. I stood by the grill with Tom Henderson, pretending to care about his opinions on charcoal versus gas, while tracking Irma and Cleo across the yard. They moved like a binary system, Cleo's animation balanced by Irma's stillness. "James!" Cleo materialized beside me with a glass of sangria and a smile that suggested she already knew things about me I hadn't admitted to myself. "You're the architect neighbor Irma mentioned." "Guilty. She said you were talented. She didn't mention you looked like you were waiting for permission to exhale." Her eyes darker than Irma's, but just as sharp held mine with unsettling directness. "You remind me of someone standing at the edge of a pool, trying to decide if you're brave enough to jump." Irma appeared then, touched Cleo's arm in gentle warning. "Be kind." "I'm being kind. Honesty is kindness." Cleo turned back to me. "My sister thinks you're interesting. That's rare. She usually finds people exhaustingly predictable." The conversation shifted to safer territory. Cleo's gallery in Brooklyn, her recent divorce, the liberating terror of starting over at 43. I felt Irma watching me, measuring my responses. When Sarah called my name from across the yard, her voice carried a tone I recognized. Time to go. boundaries being crossed, explanations required later. Cleo smiled knowingly. Edges of pools, she whispered. They're the most dangerous places. Text came at 11:30 on a Tuesday. Sarah was already asleep, her back to me in the darkness we'd learned to share without touching. Still awake? Irma's message glowed on my phone screen. I should have ignored it. Instead, unfortunately, the Morrison Project? Among other things. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I've been thinking about what you said, about measuring your life in comfort instead of meaning. My chest tightened. And? I think most people do. The brave ones just admit it. I stared at the ceiling, thumb hovering. Are you saying I'm not brave? I'm saying you're deciding whether to be. The conversation was unspooled for 40 minutes, careful at first, then less so. She told me about her husband's final morning, how he'd complained about the coffee being too bitter, how that complaint had become the last ordinary thing before everything shattered. I told her about the night Sarah and I stopped saying, I love you, and started saying, love you, how the missing pronoun felt like a small death neither of us acknowledged. At 12:17, I deleted the entire thread, then lay awake hating myself for both the conversation and the deletion. Jason cornered me Wednesday afternoon in the break room. Talk to me. Nothing to talk about. Bullshit. You're distracted. You're making errors you never make. And yesterday you forgot the Riverside meeting entirely. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Whatever you're thinking about, think harder. We've built something real here. Don't torch it for something that feels real. It's just stress. The Morrison deadlines. James. His voice dropped. I've known you for 20 years. Don't lie to me. But I already was. The guilt settled in my chest like concrete, heavy and permanent, and I wondered when exactly I'd become someone who lied to the people who trusted him most. I told Sarah I had a client dinner, watched her nod without looking up from her laptop, and drove to Irma's house with my heart performing arrhythmia. She answered in bare feet and a gray sweater, poured wine without asking if I wanted any, and we sat at her living room where everything felt deliberate. The worn leather chair, the books stacked on the floor, the absence of anything meant to impress. Why did you come? She asked. I don't know. Yes, you do. The wine was good, French, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. We talked about architecture, travel, and the mythology of successful lives. Then she told me about the year after her husband died, how she kept setting the table for two, how grief isn't the big moments, but the 1,000 small adjustments to a world that no longer includes someone. You're still married to him, I said. In some ways, yes. But I'm not pretending he's coming back. She held my gaze. That's the difference between grief and denial. The statement landed like an accusation. I set down my glass. I'm not in denial. Aren't you? You've built this beautiful performance, successful firm, beautiful home, appropriate marriage. But when's the last time you did something because you wanted to, not because it looked right? That's not fair. No, she agreed. It's accurate. The silence stretched until I couldn't hold it anymore. I don't know how to want things anymore. I've spent so long being responsible, being appropriate, being what everyone needs me to be. She leaned forward, close enough that I could smell her perfume, feel the warmth of her proximity. I'm not asking you to choose me, James. I'm asking if you're brave enough to choose yourself. We were inches apart. The kiss hung between us, inevitable and impossible. Neither of us moved. The restraint felt more intimate than contact, more honest than any touch could be. I left at midnight, drove home slowly, and climbed in a bed beside Sarah, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I spent the next week trying to become the man I'd claimed to be. Came home by 6 every evening, asked Sarah about her day with genuine-sounding interest, suggested dinner at the Italian place where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. She seemed pleased, or perhaps just relieved that I was present instead of orbiting somewhere outside our shared atmosphere. Friday night. Over risotto neither of us finished. I reached for her hand across the table. She let me take it, squeezed back with appropriate pressure, and I felt nothing except the performance of feeling. We drove home in comfortable silence that felt like suffocation. In bed, I tried to bridge the years of careful distance, but every touch felt choreographed, every word scripted. She responded correctly, appropriately, and afterward we lay in the dark like actors waiting for the director to call cut. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "Fine. Just tired." The lies settled between us like all the others, invisible and permanent. Monday, Jason closed my office door with the deliberate care that precedes difficult conversations. "Where were you Thursday night?" My stomach dropped. "Client dinner." "What?" "Because I drove past Leon's around 8 and your car wasn't there." He remained standing, arms crossed. "I called your cell." Straight to voicemail. The walls contracted. I was at a different restaurant. The client changed plans. "James." His voice was flat, disappointed. "I've covered for you twice with the Morrison team. I've made excuses when you've been unreachable, but I won't be complicit in whatever this is." He leaned against the door. "Is this who you are now? Because I don't recognize you." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I had no answer that wouldn't make it worse. He left without slamming the door, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. I sat in my office watching the city through the window, realizing I'd become unrecognizable even to myself. Cleo appeared in my office doorway Tuesday afternoon without warning, wearing a leather jacket and carrying a portfolio that looked expensive and well-traveled. My assistant had clearly been charmed into waving her through. "I hope you don't mind," she said, closing the door behind her. "I have a design question." "About what?" "About why you're torturing yourself." She sat in the chair across from my desk, uninvited, crossed her legs, and studied me with the same unsettling directness as her sister. "That's a design question, right? The architecture of self-destruction." My jaw tightened. "If Irma sent you." "She didn't. She'd kill me if she knew I was here." Cleo leaned forward. "But I watched you at that barbecue, and I've seen that look before." My ex-husband had it for the last 2 years of our marriage. Like he was underwater, trying to signal for help while everyone on shore thought he was waving. "I'm fine. You're drowning. And the really sad part is you think that's loyalty." She pulled out her phone, scrolled, and showed me nothing. Just a gesture to punctuate her point. "Here's what you need to understand. Irma doesn't need saving. She's fine. She buried a man she loved, survived it, and rebuilt. She's not asking you to rescue her. I never said, but you need something, and pretending you don't won't keep you afloat." She stood, walked to the window, overlooking downtown. "So here's my uncomfortable question. What do you actually want, James? Not what you should want. Not what's responsible or appropriate. What do you want?" The question hung between us, simple and impossible. I opened my mouth, closed it, realized I had no answer that wasn't a performance of an answer. "That's what I thought," Cleo said softly. She left her card on my desk, gallery information in elegant typography. "When you figure it out, call someone. Therapist, priest, bartender. Just stop pretending the question doesn't exist." She left, and I sat alone with the silence she'd created, unable to name a single honest desire. The Riverside Oaks Summer Gala occupied Henderson's expansive backyard, white tents and string lights transforming suburban grass into something aspirational. Sarah had insisted we attend, her cheerfulness since my failed reconnection attempt carrying an edge of desperation I pretended not to notice. She wore the blue dress I'd once said I loved, though I couldn't remember when I'd last meant it. Jason and Amanda arrived early, positioned themselves near the bar with strategic sightlines. Amanda hugged Sarah warmly. Jason shook my hand with professional courtesy that felt like punishment. "Beautiful evening," he said, eyes communicating something entirely different. Irma appeared in cream linen, Cleo beside her in something vintage and dramatic. They moved through the crowd like people who'd stopped performing years ago, comfortable in their own gravity. Sarah stiffened beside me, her hand finding my elbow with territorial pressure. "Your neighbors," she said brightly. "Should we say hello?" "If you want." But Cleo found us first, materializing with champagne and dangerous charm. "Sarah, James has told us absolutely nothing about you, which is very mysterious and compelling." Sarah's smile tightened. "He's mentioned you. The sister from Brooklyn?" "Guilty, though I prefer the sister with questionable life choices." Cleo's laugh drew attention. Irma approached slowly, inevitably, her eyes meeting mine across the narrowing distance. "Irma," Sarah said, extending her hand. "We keep missing each other." "Sarah." Irma's handshake was brief, professional. "James speaks highly of you." The lie hung between us like smoke. Jason watched from 10 feet away, reading every micro-expression, cataloging evidence. Amanda said something about catering. Cleo made a joke about property values. The conversation continued in polite waves while underneath, everything felt combustible. Sarah's hand tightened on my arm. Irma's eyes held mine for 1 second longer than safe. Jason's expression said he'd seen it all. The forced normalcy became unbearable. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood in Henderson's powder room, staring at my reflection and not recognizing the man looking back. Sarah fell asleep quickly, wine and social performance exhausting her into unconsciousness. I lay beside her for an hour, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing down like architectural failure, all that careful construction concealing fundamental structural problems. At midnight, I saw a light in Irma's backyard through our bedroom window. She sat alone under string lights, reading a blanket across her lap. I watched her turn a page, utterly self-contained, needing nothing from me or anyone. I moved without deciding to move. Down the stairs, out the back door, across the cool grass that marked the property line between her life and mine. She looked up as I approached, unsurprised, and closed her book. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "No." She gestured to the chair beside her. I sat, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and distant sprinklers, the soundtrack of suburban predictability. "I need to know," I said finally. "What happens if I say yes?" "To what, James? I haven't asked you anything. You challenged me. That first night. You've been challenging me ever since." She set the book aside, turned to face me fully. "You came here looking for permission. I can't give you that." Her voice was gentle but uncompromising. "Only you know if you're the kind of man who stays in a safe place that's killing him, or the kind who burns it down to find out who he really is. And if I burn it down, if I lose everything, then you'll know what it costs to be honest. And you'll know who you are when nobody's watching." She reached out, touched my hand briefly. "But that's your choice, James. Not mine. Not Sarah's. Yours." I looked back toward my house, dark windows, perfect landscaping, the architecture of a life I'd built to specifications I no longer remembered choosing. Then back at Irma, waiting patiently for me to decide. I stood slowly. The choice hung in the cool night air, irreversible once made. And I chose.